History is filled with cities that faded slowly, but these 15 vanished in a single day. They are not stories of gradual decay, but of sudden, catastrophic endings. One moment, a city thrived. The next, it was buried under ash, swallowed by desert, or abandoned in haste. These ruins are frozen moments, time capsules sealed by disaster. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the precise forces that can shatter a civilization and what these silent stones still whisper about our own world. How does a society simply stop? What do you find when you dig up a day that never ended? What does it feel like to stand at the peak of human achievement, moments before it all disappears? The first whispers of this kind of ending come from an island paradise. On what is now Santorini, a city named Akrotiri once hummed with life. This was a jewel of the Minoan civilization, a place of trade and artistry, nestled on the slopes of a massive volcano. Then, around 1600 years before the Common Era, that volcano awoke with a fury that reshaped the Mediterranean world. The eruption of Thera was one of the most violent events in human history, and it did not just destroy Akrotiri, it preserved it. The city was entombed under many meters of fine volcanic ash, creating a perfect, airless seal. For over 3,000 years it waited. When archaeologists began to uncover it, they found not a tomb but a snapshot. This is a Bronze Age Pompeii, a city frozen not at the moment of death, but seemingly at the moment of departure. Walk its excavated streets and you see multi-story buildings still standing, their walls adorned with breathtaking frescoes of antelopes and fishermen, of saffron gatherers and flotillas. You can peer into rooms where pottery was left on shelves, where furniture once stood, where the rhythm of daily life is palpable. The wealth and sophistication are staggering, revealing a society at the absolute peak of its prosperity, connected to empires across the sea. Yet the most profound clue is an absence. Despite the scale of the disaster, no human remains have been found within the town itself. No signs of a frantic, final struggle. This suggests something remarkable, a possibility that chills and amazes in equal measure. The evidence points to a planned evacuation. It seems the people of Akrotiri had warning, perhaps from preliminary earthquakes and smaller eruptions. They gathered what they could and left, their homes sealed by ash as a memorial to their foresight. But their civilization was not so lucky. The cataclysm that followed, with tsunamis and climate-altering ash clouds, likely crippled the wider Minoan world, proving that even escape from the initial blow cannot always save a culture from the aftershocks of a collapsing sky. The silent evacuation of Akrotiri presents a haunting contrast to the most famous ancient collapse of all. Nearly 17 centuries later, a different volcano would offer no such warning. In the year 79 of the Common Era, Mount Vesuvius erupted over the bustling Roman Bay of Naples. Two prosperous cities, Pompeii and Herculaneum, stood directly in its path. Their fates, though linked by the same catastrophic day, were sealed by two distinct and terrifying forces. Pompeii was first bombarded by a rain of pumice stone and ash, a heavy, suffocating blanket that collapsed roofs and buried streets over many hours. Herculaneum, closer to the volcano, faced something swifter and far more violent. It was struck by a pyroclastic flow, a superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and rock that raced down the mountain at impossible speeds, instantly enveloping the city in temperatures that could vaporize flesh and bone. What these separate modes of burial preserved for us is equally distinct, and together they create an unparalleled portrait of Roman life. Pompeii, under its thick layer of pumice, retained the shapes of its world. When the organic material of bodies decayed within the hardened ash, they left perfect cavities in the shape of the fallen. 19th-century archaeologists pioneered a technique of pouring plaster into these voids, creating heartbreaking casts of the volcano's victims in their final moments, a family huddled together, a man covering his face. The city's buildings, from bakeries with loaves still in ovens to taverns with political graffiti scrawled on walls, were preserved in startling detail. We can walk its stone streets, see the ruts from cartwheels, and read advertisements for gladiatorial games. Herculaneum's destruction was more total, yet in some ways more revealing. The pyroclastic flow carbonized everything in its path, turning wood into charcoal and sealing entire structures. This intense heat preserved organic materials that vanished in Pompeii, including wooden furniture, textiles, and most remarkably, hundreds of papyrus scrolls from a private library, their contents locked inside carbonized blocks that scientists are only now beginning to read. While fewer poignant casts exist here, the city reveals a wealthier, more refined seaside resort with intricate mosaics and marbled halls. Together, these sister cities do more than document a disaster. They freeze a complete, vibrant society in a single, ordinary day, from the food they ate to the gods they worshipped, making the distant Romans feel not like historical figures, but like neighbors whose world ended before they could finish breakfast. This immediacy forces a question: if our own cities were suddenly stilled, what mundane details would future explorers use to piece together the story of us? Yet for all the drama of volcanic fire and ash, some of history's most profound collapses arrive in silence. Far to the east, in what is now Pakistan, lie the baked brick ruins of Mohenjo-daro, one of the greatest cities of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. Around 4,500 years ago, this was a metropolis of staggering sophistication, home to perhaps 40,000 people, and then, by around 1900 BCE, it was empty. Its end poses a different kind of mystery, not a single day of fire, but a slow, relentless squeeze that may have finally broken a society's will to endure. For decades, the silence of its streets fueled dramatic theories. Early excavators, finding scattered remains in the uppermost levels, speculated about a sudden, violent invasion. Others pointed to evidence of massive flooding from the nearby Indus River, imagining a catastrophic deluge. But more recent archaeology and climate science have woven a subtler and perhaps more unsettling narrative. The collapse likely came not from a single enemy or flood, but from a changing world. Studies suggest the gradual drying of the Great Hakra River system, the lifeblood of the civilization, combined with shifting monsoon patterns. This was a slow-motion disaster, a creeping drought that would have withered crops, strained trade, and ultimately made sustaining a giant urban center impossible. What the ruins of Mohenjo-daro reveal, however, is not a story of desperation, but one of extraordinary order. Walking its grid-patterned streets, you see the blueprint of a remarkably modern mind. The city was meticulously planned, with standardized baked bricks used across the entire region, a uniformity that speaks of central authority or shared cultural ideals. It boasted the world's first known urban sanitation system, with covered drains running alongside streets and into homes. There were great public baths like the famous Great Bath, likely used for ritual purification. But then you encounter the most puzzling silence of all. Amidst this obvious civic grandeur, archaeologists have found no obvious palaces, no giant temples, no monumental statues of kings or gods. There are no clear royal tombs bursting with treasure. The city's wealth seems to have been invested in communal well-being and practical infrastructure. This has led scholars to suggest Mohenjo-daro and the Indus civilization as a whole may have been organized very differently from its contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia. It might have been a more collective, perhaps even egalitarian, society, governed by merchants and priests rather than an all-powerful pharaoh. Its script, found on thousands of small seals, remains undeciphered, locking away its final thoughts. So we are left with a haunting duality. The ruins speak eloquently of how they lived, with brilliant planning and shared purpose, but they only whisper about why they finally left, leaving us to wonder if the greatest threat to a city is not always a sudden explosion, but the slow, quiet disappearance of the water it was built upon. But what came before streets and sewers, before kings and written laws? To find the very first stirrings of urban life, we must travel even further back, to a time when the idea of a city was still being invented. On the windswept plains of central Turkey, a great mound rises from the earth. This is Çatalhöyük, a settlement so ancient it predates the pyramids of Egypt by over 4,000 years. For roughly 2,000 years, from around 7500 to 5700 BCE, this was home to a community of up to 10,000 people, a staggering number for the Neolithic world. Its end was not a dramatic collapse, but a slow fading, a gradual depopulation as people eventually moved on to other places. Yet the way it was left behind, and then slowly buried by the very earth its houses were made from, created another kind of time capsule, one that preserves not the peak of a civilization, but its messy, brilliant, experimental birth. Çatalhöyük was a city without a blueprint. There were no streets, no grand plazas, no obvious public buildings. Instead, it was a single, gigantic honeycomb of mud brick houses, each one sharing walls with its neighbors, packed so tightly that the only way to move across the settlement was to walk over the rooftops. Entry to each home was through a hole in the roof, reached by a ladder. This created a unique social landscape, a world where daily life literally unfolded above and below, where your rooftop was the highway and your neighbor's ceiling was your floor. Inside these compact homes, archaeologists have uncovered a world rich with symbolism and ritual. The walls are adorned with vivid paintings, some of the oldest known narrative art in the world, depicting hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and what appear to be maps of the settlement itself. But most striking are the installations found within the houses. Beneath plastered platforms, researchers have found the carefully buried remains of ancestors, suggesting a deep, domestic veneration of lineage. And throughout the rooms, set into walls and pillars, are the massive horned skulls of wild bulls known as aurochs, coated with plaster and clay to create startling architectural features. This was not a society with temples. Instead, the sacred and the everyday were completely intertwined. The bull, a symbol of immense power and danger, was brought into the heart of the home. The ancestors rested literally underfoot. Çatalhöyük reveals a moment in human history where community was everything, where security was found in density and shared walls, and where the mysteries of life, death, and the wild were negotiated not in palaces, but in the intimate, painted rooms of a connected hive. It shows us that the first urban experiment was less about organizing space for efficiency, and more about creating a collective shell against a vast and unknown world. The people eventually left, and their extraordinary hive was slowly swallowed by the plain, leaving a silent question in the soil. Did they abandon their experiment because it became too crowded, too inward-looking? Or did they simply take the idea of community with them, scattering the seeds of a concept that would one day grow into the cities we know today? The idea of a city as a collective hive gives way to a very different urban dream, one of absolute power and divine kingship. For that, we must return to the land of the pharaohs, but not to the famous capitals of the old or new kingdoms. Instead, we journey to a city that rose to prominence when Egypt's unity was fracturing, a glittering capital built on shifting ground, both literally and politically. This is Tanis, the Thebes of the north, a royal city that vanished so completely into the desert that its very existence was debated by scholars for centuries. While the Great Pyramids symbolize eternity, Tanis tells a story of impermanence, of a magnificent capital abandoned seemingly overnight to the sands. Founded as the capital during the 21st dynasty around the year 1070 BCE, Tanis was meant to be a new center of power in the Nile Delta. It was constructed with grandeur, its temples built from stones quarried and even salvaged from older, more famous cities, a physical symbol of claiming past glory. For nearly 2 centuries, it thrived as the seat of pharaohs, a hub of trade and worship. Then it was simply left behind. The leading theory for its sudden abandonment is as practical as it is profound. The Nile, the life-giving artery of Egypt, is not a static river. Over centuries, its branches in the delta shift, silt up, and find new courses. Evidence suggests the Tanitic branch, which gave the city its port and its fertility, gradually began to fail. The waters receded, the farmland dried up, and the desert began its steady, patient advance. A capital cannot survive without water, and so the court, the priests, and the people likely relocated, leaving their splendid city to be buried, not by a volcanic explosion, but by a slow, creeping tide of sand. This very abandonment, however, is what made its rediscovery in the modern era so spectacular. Because Tanis was not built over by later settlements, its royal necropolis lay hidden and almost completely undisturbed for nearly 3,000 years. In 1939, the archaeologist Pierre Montet made one of the greatest discoveries in Egyptian archaeology, yet one often overshadowed by Tutankhamun's tomb found just 17 years earlier. Within the temple precinct at Tanis, Montet uncovered the intact royal tombs of pharaohs such as Susen's I and Shoshenq II. The treasures within were breathtaking, rivaling those of the boy king. They included exquisite jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli, alabaster vessels, and most strikingly, magnificent coffins made not of gold but of solid silver. For the ancient Egyptians, silver was rarer and often more valuable than gold, imported from distant lands. A silver coffin was a statement of extreme wealth and power. What do these untouched tombs tell us? They provide a crystal-clear snapshot of a misunderstood era. This period, known as the Third Intermediate Period, is often viewed as a time of weakness and division, a sad decline after the glories of Ramses II. The treasures of Tanis shatter that simplistic view. They reveal a kingdom that, while politically fragmented and sharing power with priests in Thebes to the south, was still phenomenally rich, artistically sophisticated, and deeply connected to trade networks. The craftsmanship of the silver coffins and intricate pectorals shows no decline in skill, only a change in style and patronage. Tanis proves that even in a time of decentralization, Egyptian culture and its core beliefs in the afterlife remained vibrant and extraordinarily wealthy. The city's ruins whisper that collapse is not always about poverty or cultural decay. Sometimes it is about geography itself turning against you, leaving behind a sealed vault of splendor that forces us to rewrite a chapter of history we thought we knew. A different kind of silence blankets the ruins of Tikal. Deep in the Guatemalan rainforest, its limestone temples rise like stone mountains from the jungle canopy, monuments to a civilization that reached staggering heights before its world contracted. Tikal was one of the greatest city-states of the Maya Classic period, a political and spiritual powerhouse for over 1,000 years. Then, around the 9th century of the Common Era, its grand plazas fell quiet, its royal dynasty ended, and the forest began its long, patient reclamation. This was not an isolated event, but part of a sweeping regional transformation often called the Classic Maya Collapse. Yet within Tikal's own stones and soil, we find the specific, compounding pressures that can break even the mightiest of kingdoms. The scale of construction here is almost overwhelming. The Great Plaza is flanked by Temple I and Temple Roman II, soaring pyramids that served as royal tombs and stages for cosmic ritual. Beyond them, the North Acropolis is a layered history of kings, each new ruler building his temple over the tomb of his predecessor. For centuries, the rhythm was constant, expansion and aggrandizement, a visible heartbeat of power. And then it stopped. Archaeologists can trace this halt in the very masonry. The final major constructions are often less finished, with rougher stonework, as if the skilled labor and wilter complete them vanished partway through. The last dated monument erected by a Tikal king was carved in the year 869. After that, the stone calendars simply cease. What happened? The ruins offer several interlocking answers. From sediment cores taken from nearby lakes, scientists have reconstructed a climate nightmare. The 8th and 9th centuries saw a series of intense, multi-decade droughts, periods where life-giving rains failed year after year. For a society dependent on seasonal rainfall for agriculture, this was a direct threat to survival, straining the social contract between the people and the kings who were believed to ensure cosmic order and fertility. At the same time, the landscape itself tells a story of rising fear. In Tikal's later centuries, a massive defensive earthwork and moat system was built, cutting off the city center from the hinterlands. This was not for ceremony. It is the architecture of siege, a clear sign that warfare with neighboring city-states had escalated from ritualized clashes to existential threats. The pressure was coming from all sides, a tightening vise of hunger and conflict. The final inscriptions hint at the political unraveling within. The last kings of Tikal still claimed grand titles, but their monuments are fewer and found only in the core of the city. It suggests their authority was shrinking, their ability to command labor and loyalty fading as the droughts persisted and enemies pressed close. The collapse then was likely not a single event but a cascade. A weakened kingdom struggling to feed its people could not withstand the shocks of war. A society in constant conflict could not marshal the unity to solve profound ecological challenges. The royal rituals lost their power when the rains did not return, so the people, in families and small groups, likely made a pragmatic choice. They left the stone heart of the kingdom and dispersed into the forest, returning to a more sustainable, decentralized way of life. The great plazas, built to echo the cosmos and proclaim the glory of kings, were surrendered to the roots of ceiba trees and the calls of howler monkeys. Tikal's ruins teach us that a civilization's foundations are not just stone, but a fragile pact between people, their leaders, and the environment. When that triad fractures under simultaneous stress, even the most towering temples can become silent memorials to a broken balance. Across the ocean, another stone city tells a story of wealth and power that was nearly erased by myth. In the highlands of southern Africa, the massive granite walls of Great Zimbabwe stand as a silent rebuke to a colonial narrative that refused to believe Africans could build such grandeur. This was the capital of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, a center of authority and trade that flourished from the 11th to the 15th centuries, long before European ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Yet for generations, European explorers and settlers, confronted by its scale and sophistication, invented fantastical origins. They claimed it was the palace of the biblical Queen of Sheba, or a colony built by Phoenicians or Arabs, anyone but the ancestors of the Shona people who lived there. Archaeology has utterly dismantled these myths. The ruins are unequivocally African, built by the ancestors of the modern Shona, and they reveal a society of remarkable achievement. The architecture itself is a masterpiece of engineering and artistry, built without mortar in a technique called dry stone walling. The most iconic structure, the Great Enclosure, is a vast elliptical wall, in some places over 30 feet high and 15 feet thick, made from precisely cut granite blocks fitted together so perfectly they have endured for centuries. Inside this wall stands the mysterious conical tower, a solid stone structure nearly 20 feet in diameter, its purpose still debated but likely symbolic of grain storage or royal authority. This was not a defensive fortress but a royal precinct, a place of ceremony and administration. What funded such monumental construction? The answer lies in the soil and in trade goods found across the Indian Ocean. Great Zimbabwe sat at the heart of a vast network controlling the gold trade from inland mines. Gold dust, nuggets, and finished jewelry flowed from the city to coastal ports like Sofala, where Swahili and Arab merchants traded for ceramics, glass, and cloth from as far away as Persia and China. The wealth this generated was staggering. Within the ruins, archaeologists have found artifacts like Chinese celadon pottery, Persian faience bowls, and Arabian glass beads, proof of its global connections. But then, by the mid-15th century, this thriving capital was largely abandoned. The royal court moved north to establish new centers, and the great stone walls were left to the elements. Why the ruins suggest a combination of pressures, not a single catastrophe. One strong possibility is environmental strain, supporting a large urban population, and their livestock in this region required careful management. Evidence points to deforestation and soil exhaustion over centuries, a gradual degradation of the land that may have made sustaining the capital increasingly difficult. At the same time, political and economic shifts were likely at play. Control over trade routes could have shifted, or internal dynastic struggles may have prompted a ruling family to establish a new power base elsewhere. The decline was likely a slow uncoupling, a strategic relocation rather than a violent end. Great Zimbabwe's legacy, therefore, is twofold. Its stones proclaim a powerful, sophisticated, and wealthy African civilization that was a major player in medieval global trade, a truth that colonial myths tried to bury. And its silent courtyards pose a universal question about sustainability, about how even the most prosperous city must ultimately listen to the land it is built upon. When the balance between a kingdom's ambition and its environment tips, even walls of solid stone cannot hold back the slow tide of change. High on the sun-baked plateaus of Colorado, a different kind of urban experiment unfolded not on open plains but within the very rock itself. Here, the ancestral Pueblones, ancestors of modern Pueblo peoples, created one of history's most dramatic architectural statements. For generations, they lived on the mesa tops, farming the thin soil. Then, in the 12th century, something shifted. They began constructing entire villages in colossal, south-facing alcoves that scarred the canyon walls, places like the magnificent cliff palace at Mesa Verde. These were not mere shelters, but sophisticated, multi-story apartment complexes of sandstone bricks and mortar, built with a breathtaking understanding of their environment. The design was a masterpiece of adaptation. The massive overhanging cliff provided natural shelter from snow and summer sun, while the southern exposure captured precious winter warmth. Within these stone cities, life was organized around circular, subterranean rooms called kivas, sacred spaces for ceremony and community gathering, accessed by a ladder through a hole in the roof. Surrounding them were rows of living and storage rooms, some with hundreds of units, all connected by a maze of tunnels and ladders. It was a vertical, interconnected world of incredible communal intimacy. Yet by the end of the 13th century, these bustling cliffside villages were completely empty. The departure was so abrupt that when archaeologists first entered, they found a haunting tableau of daily life interrupted. Metates, the stone slabs for grinding corn, were left in place. Pottery vessels sat in corners. Tools were abandoned in rooms. It was as if the people had simply walked away one day, taking only what they could carry. What could make an entire culture abandon such ingeniously crafted homes? The answer is written in the trees. By studying the growth rings of ancient timbers used in the construction, scientists have uncovered a climatic horror story. The late 13th century saw the onset of a profound, decades-long megadrought, one of the most severe in the region's history. For nearly 25 years, the rains essential for growing corn, beans, and squash in that arid landscape simply failed. The storage rooms, once filled with surplus, would have emptied. The springs that fed the canyon would have dwindled. The architectural ingenuity that solved the problem of shelter could not solve the problem of a vanishing water supply. This environmental catastrophe was likely compounded by social strain. The very design that made the cliff dwellings defensible also speaks to a growing need for security, perhaps from neighboring groups feeling the same pressures. Living in such tight, concentrated quarters for generations could have led to resource tensions and social friction. The ruins of Mesa Verde, therefore, tell a layered story. They are a testament to human brilliance in the face of a harsh land, showcasing a communal society that thrived through cooperation and clever engineering. But they are also a sobering lesson in limits. When the climate shifted beyond a threshold that even their most advanced adaptations could manage, the community made a monumental collective decision. They gathered what hope they could carry and migrated south, joining other Pueblo communities in areas with more reliable water, leaving their magnificent stone cities as silent monuments to resilience and to the moment when the sky itself turned against them. A different kind of collapse echoed across the Bronze Age world, one that toppled empires through fire and sword. In the rocky highlands of Anatolia, the Hittite capital of Hattusa stood as a fortress of monumental ambition. Its cyclopean walls, built from stones so massive they seemed the work of giants, wrapped around a city of temples and palaces, the nerve center of an empire that rivaled Egypt and Babylon. Yet around the year 1200 BCE, at the climax of the chaotic period known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, this mighty capital met a violent end. Hattusa was not slowly abandoned. It was sacked, burned, and left in smoking ruins. The evidence is stark in the archaeological record, a thick, dark layer of ash and charcoal covering the grand buildings. For centuries, this fiery destruction was the only story the stones could tell, a silent monument to a mysterious, catastrophic finale. But Hattusa held a secret, one that would transform our understanding of this collapse from a vague mystery into a detailed, human drama. Buried within the remains of the royal palace were archives not of parchment or papyrus, but of thousands of baked clay tablets. These tablets, inscribed in cuneiform script, survived the very fire that destroyed the city, the heat hardening them into permanent records. They are not epic poems or religious texts, but the day-to-day paperwork of an empire. We have diplomatic correspondence with pharaohs, meticulous treaties that outline borders and royal marriages, detailed legal codes, and even anxious reports from frontier governors. This archive provides a real-time window into the final decades of the Hittite world. The picture that emerges is not of a weak or decaying empire, but of one straining under immense, interconnected pressures. The letters reveal a kingdom deeply worried about food. Repeated pleas for grain shipments from Egypt suggest chronic shortages, likely driven by drought and failing harvests across the region. Other tablets speak of unrest among subject peoples and powerful rivalries within the royal court itself. And then there are the ominous, fragmentary reports of movements in the west, of mysterious groups referred to simply as the Sea Peoples, raiding coasts and destabilizing trade networks. The ruins of Hattusa, therefore, tell a layered tale of downfall. The burned gates and shattered walls testify to a final, violent assault, likely by invaders who overwhelmed the legendary defenses. But the clay tablets reveal that the empire was already buckling from within long before the first torch was set. It was a slow-motion unraveling of a complex system. Climate stress led to famine, which fueled internal political strife and weakened central authority, which in turn made the empire vulnerable to external shock. The invaders may have delivered the final blow, but they struck a body already critically ill. Hattusa's legacy is this profound duality, the silent, ashen destruction of its walls speaking in concert with the vivid, written whispers of its archives. Together, they show that the collapse of a civilization is rarely a single event, but a chain reaction where ecological, political, and military failures converge into one catastrophic fiery night. While Hattusa fell to a symphony of internal and external pressures, another legendary palace met its end through a combination of natural fury and human ambition. On the island of Crete, the palace of Knossos was the dazzling heart of Minoan civilization, a sprawling complex so vast and intricate that it would later inspire the Greek myth of the Labyrinth. Its collapse was not a single, sudden burial, but a series of devastating blows over centuries, each one chipping away at a culture's confidence until a final, decisive shift erased it from history. The ruins left behind are a palimpsest, layers of destruction and rebirth that tell a story of cultural brilliance and its ultimate absorption. Walking through the partially reconstructed halls of Knossos, you are immediately struck by its labyrinthine quality. Unlike the rigid, grid-like plans of later cities, Knossos feels organic, a maze of interconnected courtyards, staircases, and hundreds of rooms that seem to sprawl without a clear center. This complex layout, combined with the discovery of the double-axe symbol, or labyrinth, throughout the site, is almost certainly the real-world origin of the later Greek legend of the Minotaur's maze. The myth of a half-man, half-bull monster imprisoned in a labyrinth built by King Minos likely grew from a distant memory of this bewildering palace and the central role the bull played in Minoan culture. That role is spectacularly confirmed by the palace's vibrant frescoes. Unlike the formal, solemn art of Egypt or Mesopotamia, Minoan art bursts with life and motion. We see dolphins swimming, ladies in elegant gowns, and most famously, the breathtaking scenes of bull leaping. This appears to depict a dangerous ritual or sport where acrobats, both male and female, would vault over a charging bull. It speaks of a society that saw the bull not just as a source of food, but as a sacred symbol of power to be engaged with directly, a culture of grace, risk, and astonishing physical confidence. Yet the palace floors also hold darker layers. Archaeological evidence shows Knossos was damaged and rebuilt multiple times, most likely due to powerful earthquakes common in the region. Then, around 1600 BC, came the colossal eruption of Thera, the volcano that buried Akrotiri. While Knossos was not entombed, it would have been hammered by the resulting tsunamis and blanketed by ash, dealing a crippling blow to its maritime economy and social order. Palace was rebuilt once more, but it was a weaker, shadow version of its former self. The final, definitive end came around 1400 BCE. The ruins from this period show clear signs of a violent conflagration, but who set the fire? Here, the most telling clues are not in the ash but in the clay. Within the burned palace, archaeologists found tablets inscribed not with the earlier, undeciphered Minoan script known as Linear A, but with a later script called Linear B. When this script was finally decoded in the 1950s, it revealed a stunning fact. Linear B was used to write an early form of Greek. The tablets from Knossos are bureaucratic inventories, lists of goods and people, and they are written in the language of the Mycenaeans, the warlike mainland Greeks whose citadels like Mycenae and Terans were rising to power. This linguistic shift in the administrative heart of Knossos is the quiet, definitive proof of a cultural takeover. The fiery destruction was likely the work of Mycenaean invaders or a rebellion by local elites who had already adopted Mycenaean ways. The vibrant, sea-focused, artistically fluid Minoan culture, with its bull-leaping and labyrinthine palaces, did not simply vanish in a day. It was first shaken by natural disaster, then gradually suffocated and absorbed by a new, more martial power from the mainland. The ruins of Knossos, therefore, reveal a double collapse. The first was physical from earthquake and volcanic ash. The second, and more complete, was cultural. The palace's final layers show a world where the old symbols were replaced by new accounting, where the language of administration changed, marking the moment one civilization ended and another began writing its lists over the ashes. The story of a palace's cultural absorption finds a stark contrast in the silent, overwhelming scale of a city built by a people whose name we do not even know. In the highlands of central Mexico, long before the Aztecs named it and wondered at its origins, stood Teotihuacan. At its peak around the year 450 of the Common Era, this was one of the largest cities on Earth, home to perhaps 125,000 souls, a metropolis of such grandeur that its ruins would humble the later Aztec emperors. Its meticulously planned grid, anchored by the colossal Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, speaks of a central authority of almost unimaginable power. Yet this authority left no names, no faces, no royal tombs filled with personal treasure. Its collapse, when it came in the 6th or 7th century, was not a slow fading but a fiery, deliberate erasure. The city's heart was systematically burned. Major temples along the central avenue of the dead show signs of intense, targeted fires. The grand residential compounds of the elite, sprawling palaces adorned with murals, were violated and set ablaze. This was not an accident or an invading army's random looting. The destruction was focused and symbolic, aimed squarely at the seats of power. The ruins, therefore, hold a double mystery. They reveal with stunning clarity how this society lived, while fiercely guarding the secret of who ruled it and why the people turned against them. Walking through Teotihuacan, you are struck first by its inhuman order. The city is a perfect geometric grid, aligned with celestial movements, dominated by those two monumental pyramids. This is the architecture of a powerful, impersonal state, one that could command labor on a scale that reshaped mountains. But the true revelation lies not in the temples, but in the residential districts. Archaeologists have uncovered over 2,000 multi-family apartment compounds, standardized living units built of stone and plaster, each one housing multiple families around a central courtyard. These were not hovels, but comfortable, well-constructed homes with their own drainage systems, courtyards for daily tasks, and walls often painted with vibrant murals of gods, animals, and mythological scenes. This suggests a society with a large, stable, and relatively prosperous middle class, all living according to a state-imposed plan. The absence of clear royal tombs or palaces in the traditional sense is deafening. There is no equivalent of a pharaoh's pyramid tomb here. The closest thing to a ruler's residence is the so-called ciudadela, a vast sunken plaza that might have been an administrative and ritual center, but it lacks the personal glorification found in other ancient capitals. Power in Teotihuacan seems to have been vested in an office, a system, or perhaps a council of elders rather than a single deified king. This makes the violence of its end all the more intriguing. The focused burning of temples and elite compounds points to a popular uprising, a revolt against the ruling class and the gods they served. After centuries of living under a rigid, anonymous state, perhaps the social contract shattered. The people may have risen against a distant priesthood or ruling council they felt had failed them, maybe during a period of drought or hardship. Or, some evidence suggests, the destruction could have come from an internal power struggle between different factions within the city's own elite, a civil war that consumed its core. What remains is a haunting legacy. Teotihuacan shows us that urban perfection is no guarantee of permanence. A society can achieve breathtaking scale and order, providing stability and comfort for thousands, yet still be torn apart from within when the ideas that hold it together lose their power. The ashes on the Avenue of the Dead ask us a quiet question. What happens when the architects of a perfect system become so remote that the people they house can only see them as symbols to be burned? The ashes of Knossos mark a decisive transfer of power, a shift from a maritime culture of artistry to one of armored might. This new power had its own stronghold, a fortress so formidable its very stones seemed the work of giants. In the rocky hills of mainland Greece, the citadel of Mycenae stood as the ultimate symbol of this warrior age. Its legacy is one of gold and fire, of a glittering palace culture that commanded the Aegean world before vanishing into a long, silent darkness. The end of Mycenae, around 1100 years before the Common Era, was not just the fall of a city. It was a keystone event in the wider Late Bronze Age collapse, a domino whose fall helped plunge the entire eastern Mediterranean into a centuries-long twilight. The ruins left behind are a stark study in contrasts, telling a story of immense wealth built on a fragile, top-heavy system. You approach the city through its most iconic feature, the Lion Gate. This massive entrance is capped by a single 20-ton lintel stone, and above it rests a triangular slab carved with two lionesses flanking a central pillar. They are heraldic, powerful, and utterly silent, guardians of a kingdom long gone. The walls themselves are what gave the Mycenaeans their legendary name. Built from enormous, rough-hewn limestone boulders fitted together with minimal shaping, later Greeks who saw them could not believe humans built them. They attributed the work to the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of myth. Walking these cyclopean walls, you feel their overwhelming physical presence, an architecture of intimidation and defense meant to project unshakable power. And power for the Mycenaeans was personal. This was not the anonymous state of Teotihuacan. Inside the citadel, the most revealing discoveries came from deep shaft graves found within a sacred circle. Here, Heinrich Schliemann uncovered treasures that took the world's breath away. Among them was a funeral mask of beaten gold, so lifelike and noble that Schliemann famously declared he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon. While the mask is centuries too old for the legendary Trojan War king, its sentiment was correct. This was the face of a Mycenaean warlord. The graves were filled with weapons of bronze, intricate gold jewelry, and inlaid daggers depicting scenes of lion hunts. These were the grave goods of a ruling warrior aristocracy, men whose status was earned and displayed through martial prowess, hunting skill, and the control of precious metals. The citadel was the administrative heart of this system. Clay tablets baked in the fires that later destroyed the palace tell the story in a script called Linear B. These are not poems or laws, but inventories. They meticulously record the incoming tribute of grain, oil, and spices, the distribution of bronze to armorers, the gifts of land to followers, and the movements of groups of workers. They reveal a highly centralized palace economy, where every resource was accounted for and controlled by a wanax or king and his bureaucracy. The entire kingdom functioned to supply and glorify the citadel. This top-heavy system proved brittle. The end at Mycenae, like at Hattusa, shows signs of multiple calamities converging. There is clear evidence of a great fire that consumed the palace, leaving layers of ash and collapsed, burned masonry. Some walls also show signs of earthquake damage, a common peril in the region. It is likely that a natural disaster like a quake weakened the defenses and disrupted the delicate supply lines, creating a moment of fatal vulnerability. Into that chaos came violence, whether from internal rebellion by an overtaxed population or from external raiders taking advantage of the disorder. The palace was put to the torch. The Linear B tablets hardened in that fire became the last written records for over 400 years. With the palace economy shattered, the complex trade networks that supplied the bronze for weapons and the gold for masks dissolved. The population plummeted as people abandoned the vulnerable centers for scattered, simpler settlements. Literacy vanished. The grand skills of fresco painting, metalworking, and monumental architecture were forgotten. Greece entered a true dark age, a simpler, poorer, oral world where the only memory of the Lion Gate and its gold-clad kings survived as half-remembered myths of heroes and epic wars. Mycenae's ruins, therefore, tell a cautionary tale of systemic fragility. They show that a culture can achieve dazzling heights of wealth and martial organization, yet be built on a foundation so centralized that the destruction of a single palace can erase not just a city, but the very knowledge of how to write its own name. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of earthen monument rose not from the will of kings, but from the collective effort of a vast community. On the fertile floodplain where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers meet, near modern St. Louis, the ancient city of Cahokia once thrived. From around the year 1050 to 1350 of the Common Era, this was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, a bustling urban center that was home to tens of thousands of people. Yet within the span of a few generations, this great city was largely abandoned, its grand plazas falling silent and its enormous earthen mounds slowly being reclaimed by prairie grass. Its decline, while not overnight, was remarkably swift for a place that had stood for centuries, a reminder that even the most vibrant hubs can empty with surprising speed when the foundations of their world begin to shift. What the ruins of Cahokia reveal is a society of astonishing scale and organization, built entirely from earth and human ambition. The city's heart is Monk's Mound, a colossal earthen pyramid rising 100 feet high, with a base larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was the central platform for the city's leaders, a physical and spiritual anchor visible for miles across the flat landscape. Facing it was a grand plaza spanning nearly 50 acres, a vast public space for ceremonies, markets, and gatherings. Surrounding this central precinct were over 120 smaller mounds, serving as platforms for temples, elite residences, and burial sites, all laid out according to a master plan that aligned with solar events. This was no loose collection of villages. Cahokia was a carefully planned metropolis, the capital of a complex chiefdom that exerted influence across much of the mid-continent. The wealth and reach of this society are evident in the goods found within its soil. Archaeologists have uncovered seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, and obsidian from the Rocky Mountains. These materials, transformed into ritual objects and elite ornaments, speak of a trade network that spanned the continent, funneling prestige and spiritual power back to the city's center. The society itself was likely highly stratified, with a powerful ruling class living atop the mounds, skilled artisans in surrounding neighborhoods, and a large population of farmers supporting the whole system from the fertile river bottom fields. So what could cause such a prosperous and connected city to empty? The clues lie not in artifacts of war, but in the very earth and climate records. Paleoclimate data, drawn from tree rings and soil cores, paints a picture of increasing instability during Cahokia's later centuries. The region experienced periods of severe flooding that would have inundated the low-lying farmland, followed by intense droughts that parched the soil. For a society dependent on maize agriculture to feed its immense population, this climatic whiplash would have been devastating. A few bad harvests in succession could empty grain stores and shatter the social contract. The authority of the chiefs, likely tied to their perceived ability to ensure fertility and abundance, would have crumbled alongside the failing crops. This environmental stress may have ignited social fractures that were already present. Supporting such a large, dense population requires incredible cooperation and resource management. As food became scarce, the inequalities between the elite on the mounds and the farmers in the fields may have become intolerable. The grand rituals in the plaza might have lost their power to unite when the rains did not come. The people, in family groups and clans, likely made a pragmatic choice. They dispersed across the wider river valley, returning to a more decentralized, flexible way of life that was better suited to the changing climate. The great mounds were left as silent witnesses, not to a violent conquest, but to a slow unraveling of trust and the limits of a land pushed to its breaking point. Cahokia's legacy is a profound lesson in scale, showing that human communities can build monuments that rival mountains, yet their endurance is forever tied to the delicate balance of the soil beneath them and the sky above. The immense earthen pyramids of Cahokia speak of a society bound to the rhythm of river and rain, a vulnerability shared by another metropolis on the opposite side of the world. In the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, the sprawling stone city of Angkor once stood as the heart of the mighty Khmer Empire. From the 9th to the 15th centuries, it grew into the largest pre-industrial urban complex on Earth, a testament to divine kingship and staggering engineering. Its temples, like the iconic Angkor Wat, are monuments to eternity. Yet by the mid-15th century, the royal court had permanently relocated to the coast, and the great capital was gradually absorbed by the forest. While not a sudden, single-day burial, Angkor's decline presents a masterclass in how environmental extremes can unravel even the most sophisticated systems, especially when they push a delicate balance past its breaking point. For centuries, the narrative was one of mysterious abandonment, perhaps due to foreign invasion or religious change. But modern science, using tools like aerial LiDAR mapping, has peeled back the jungle canopy to reveal a different story written into the landscape itself. The LiDAR images are breathtaking. They show that Angkor was not just a collection of magnificent temples, but a vast, low-density metropolis covering nearly 400 square miles, with suburbs, canals, and roads fanning out from the ceremonial center. At its heart was an ingenious and fragile hydraulic system, a complex network of massive reservoirs called barrays, and hundreds of miles of canals and moats were designed to capture monsoon rainwater, store it through the dry season, and redistribute it for agriculture and consumption. This system was the empire's lifeblood, enabling it to support a population of perhaps 750,000 people, and produce rice surpluses that fueled its power. The ruins, therefore, reveal a civilization that mastered its environment with unprecedented ambition. Yet the very scale of this system created profound vulnerability. Tree ring studies from the region have uncovered a climatic 1-2 punch in the late 14th century. First, a severe, decades-long drought gripped the region. The great barrays would have sat nearly empty, the canals dry. Crop yields would have plummeted, straining the social order. Then, just as the system was at its most stressed, the climate swung violently in the opposite direction. The drought broke with a period of extraordinarily intense monsoon rains. These deluges would have overwhelmed the carefully calibrated hydraulic network. Evidence in the canal systems shows signs of catastrophic erosion and massive sedimentation, the infrastructure literally choking on the very water it was built to manage. The engineered landscape, designed for a predictable rhythm of rain, could not withstand such violent extremes. This environmental double blow likely triggered a cascade of failures. Famine and disease may have followed, weakening the population's faith in the god-king whose divine mandate was to ensure prosperity and cosmic order. The economic and administrative rationale for maintaining such a colossal, damaged capital began to crumble. When the royal court eventually moved south to the Phnom Penh area in the 15th century, it was likely a strategic retreat to a location with better access to maritime trade and a more reliable water supply from the Mekong River. The shift was not an admission of defeat but a pragmatic adaptation. The empire persisted, but its spiritual and administrative center of gravity moved away. Angkor's silent, vine-choked stones offer a powerful lesson in resilience and limits. They show a society that achieved urban and hydraulic genius, reshaping a jungle into a garden city. But they also whisper that the greatest systems are often the most sensitive. When the climate pattern they were built for changes beyond their design, the very infrastructure of success can become an engine of decline. The story of Angkor is not simply one of a city lost to the jungle. but of a civilization making a calculated choice to leave behind a monumental dream when the weather gods it had sought to control finally turned unpredictable. The final whisper of a city lost to the jungle leads us to a capital carved not from jungle stone but from desert cliffs. In the arid canyons of southern Jordan, the Nabatean capital of Petra stands as a monument to a different kind of genius, one that turned scarcity into spectacular wealth. This was not a city built on agriculture but on control, a desert fortress that grew rich by mastering the flow of water and the caravans of incense. For centuries, Petra was the ultimate oasis, a glittering hub where the frankincense and myrrh routes converged. Its breathtaking rock-cut facades, like the iconic treasury, are a testament to its prosperity and its sophisticated blend of local tradition and Hellenistic style. Yet by the middle of the 4th century of the Common Era, this vibrant metropolis was in steep decline, its grand tombs left empty and its ingenious water channels falling silent. Its collapse was not a slow fade, but the result of a devastating 1-2 punch that severed its very reason for being. The first blow was geological. In the year 363, a powerful earthquake struck the region. For most cities, an earthquake damages buildings. For Petra, it attacked the city's life support system. The Nabateans were hydrological engineers of the highest order. In a landscape that received only a few inches of rain a year, they constructed an intricate network of dams, cisterns, and ceramic pipelines that captured every precious drop from flash floods and distant springs. This water was channeled through the narrow canyon known as the Sick and distributed throughout the city, allowing gardens to flourish and a population of perhaps 20,000 to thrive in the heart of the desert. The earthquake shattered this delicate conduit. It damaged the dams, cracked the pipelines, and disrupted the careful balance that made life possible. Repairing such a complex system would have been a monumental task, draining resources and morale. Then came the second, more profound blow, one from human geography. For all its desert prowess, Petra's wealth was entirely dependent on the overland caravan trade. Its power lay in controlling the routes and providing security and water to merchants crossing the harsh terrain. As the Roman Empire consolidated its hold on the region, it developed a more efficient and reliable alternative, maritime trade routes across the Red Sea and up the Nile. Why risk a slow, expensive journey through bandit-filled deserts when goods could move in greater volume by ship? The economic foundation of Petra crumbled as the caravans grew fewer and the trade shifted to the sea. The ruins left behind tell a vivid story of what was lost. The sheer scale of the rock-cut architecture, with tombs and temples' facades carved directly into the rose-red sandstone cliffs, demonstrates immense wealth and skilled labor. The Hellenistic influence in the columns and pediments shows a culture connected to the wider Mediterranean world, adopting and adapting foreign artistic ideas. But the most telling ruins are not the grand facades but the subtle ones. The carefully carved channels running along the canyon walls, the massive cisterns cut into the rock, the dams designed to control torrential floods, these are the true heart of Petra. They reveal a society that did not merely survive in the desert, but mastered it, turning a hostile environment into a strategic asset. Their eventual failure, first from natural disaster and then from economic irrelevance, offers a stark lesson. A city can be a marvel of engineering and a treasure house of art, but if the single economic lifeline that feeds it is cut, even the most brilliant adaptation to nature cannot save it. Petra's silent, sun-bleached facades stand as a monument to a brilliant, fleeting idea. A desert kingdom that proved even the most ingenious oasis can dry up when the world decides to take a different road. These 15 cities, each with its own unique story, begin to whisper a shared truth when we listen to them together. Their ruins are not random accidents of history, but the signatures of specific, recurring patterns. The ground beneath our feet, the sky above, and the societies we build are locked in a constant, delicate negotiation. These stories reveal that when that negotiation breaks down, the collapse, though it may feel sudden, is almost always the final step in a long, slow accumulation of strain. The first and perhaps most profound pattern is the vulnerability to a changing climate. From the mega-drought that emptied Mesa Verde to the erratic monsoons that crippled Angkor's hydraulic heart, environmental shifts were a relentless, invisible adversary. Cahokia's farmers faced floods and drought in cruel succession, while the Hittite and Mycenaean worlds strained under failing harvests that frayed the social fabric. These were not primitive societies helpless before nature, but highly adapted ones whose very success made them exquisitely sensitive to the climate pattern they depended on. When that pattern changed beyond the limits of their engineering or adaptation, their foundation cracked. This leads directly to the second thread, the peril of over-reliance on complex environmental management systems. The very ingenuity that allowed these cities to flourish became their Achilles heel. The Nabateans of Petra mastered desert hydrology, but their entire city hinged on that fragile network of pipes and cisterns. A single earthquake could break it. Angkor's magnificent barrays and canals were a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering, yet they were designed for a specific rainfall regime. When intense droughts and floods exceeded their capacity, the system turned from a lifeline into a liability. Similarly, the vast agricultural hinterlands that fed Teotihuacan or the Minoan fleet that sustained Knossos created centralized economies that were efficient but brittle. These systems created tremendous wealth and stability, but they also concentrated risk, making the entire society vulnerable to a single point of failure. Of course, the physical planet delivers more immediate shocks as well. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and floods appear as sudden, decisive triggers. The eruption of Thera reshaped the Mediterranean. Quakes likely weakened Hattusa and Mycenae at critical moments, but it is crucial to see these events not in isolation, but as sparks thrown onto dry tinder. A powerful earthquake in a resilient, prosperous society is a disaster to rebuild from. That same quake in a society already grappling with drought, food shortages, or political mistrust can be the catalyst for irreversible unraveling. The natural disaster interacts with the existing social vulnerabilities. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most human, pattern, the interplay between external pressure and internal social stress. Invasion, the collapse of trade routes, these are external shocks. The sea peoples for the Hittites, the shifting maritime trade that bypassed Petra, the Mycenaean takeover of Knossos, these events applied tremendous external force. But their impact was magnified or diminished by what was happening inside the city walls. Was there a strong, legitimate authority to organize a defense? Was the population united, or was there simmering inequality and resentment, as the burned elite compounds of Teotihuacan suggest? A society facing external threat while also fractured by internal strife has little resilience left. The invasion succeeds, the trade collapse bankrupts the state because there is no collective will or resource left to mount an effective response. So what do these silent stones ultimately tell us? They argue convincingly that sudden collapse is almost never about one thing. It is not simply the volcano or the drought or the invaders. It is the convergence, the terrible synergy of multiple stressors. A changing climate strains food production. That strain fuels social unrest and weakens central authority. A weakened society is less able to maintain its critical infrastructure or defend its borders. Then, when the earthquake strikes or the enemy appears at the gate, the system has no redundancy, no resilience left to absorb the blow. The city does not slowly decline, it shatters. This pattern transforms these ruins from mere relics of the past into profound mirrors. They ask us to consider the delicate webs of dependency in our own world. the complex systems we rely on, and the quiet stresses that might be accumulating unseen just beneath the surface of our own prosperity. These silent stones are more than destinations for travelers or subjects for archaeologists. They are archives of catastrophe and resilience written in ash, stone, and earth. Each ruin is a testament to a moment when the world turned, a detailed record of how societies at their peak confronted forces beyond their control. The most profound lesson they offer is not about the past, but about a pattern we still live within. The greatest civilizations are not brought low by a single flaw, but by the convergence of multiple pressures, a tightening knot of environmental change, social strain, and sudden shock. What makes these stories so compelling and so vital is their demonstration of shared fragility. Whether it was the meticulous water channels of Petra, the vast agricultural grids of Angkor, or the trade networks of the Hittites, each society built a brilliant system to harness its world. And in each case, that very system contained the seeds of its vulnerability. When the climate shifted, or the economy transformed, or the ground shook, the intricate web of dependencies could unravel with astonishing speed. So what does this mean for us living in our own dense, interconnected, technologically advanced urban centers? We are not so different. Our cities are also miracles of engineering and social organization, reliant on complex supply chains, energy grids, and stable climates. The ruins ask us to listen, not with fear, but with clarity. They urge us to look at the quiet stresses in our own systems, to build in redundancy and resilience, and to remember that the true measure of a civilization may not be the height of its towers, but the depth of its foresight. These stories of collapse are ultimately stories about balance, and about the enduring human spirit that picks up the fragments and begins again. We would love to hear which of these ancient cities resonated most with you. Was it the haunting evacuation of Akrotiri, the silent streets of Mohenjo-daro, or the engineered oasis of Petra? Share your thoughts below, and if you are curious to explore further, we have linked to more resources and related videos for your journey into the past. Thank you for listening to these whispers from the dust.